celebrate Pollinator Week and really focus on biodiversity. The whole campaign is really important and very much linked to the health and wellness of pollinators and people too. We are linked right to the core. So let's get into it. It's Pollinator Week, and this is just an image of a whole bunch of different pollinators. So we don't always think of bats and birds and things beyond just bees and butterflies, but there are a lot of different insects and other species that contribute to pollination. So here's a little list. The huge variety of plant species we have, obviously, on the planet relies on a large variety of pollinators. Over time, plants and pollinators have evolved together. So certain types of plants can only be pollinated by a certain type of bee or butterfly because of the structure of the flower and the depth of the floret and the nectar being right at the bottom. So the thing about that is it's important to have a wide variety of pollinators to ensure the diversity of the plant species in our lives, in our gardens, and in our farms. So the pollinators include bees, and there are native bees as well as managed honeybees. There are many species of butterfly, hummingbirds, bats and moths, wasps, flies, and beetles. So there are certain things in our garden we're not sure are good, but it turns out they may have a purpose related to pollination, or they could be food for something else that pollinates. That's the cycle of life. Something always eats something else. And we want to eat the food that's the result of pollination, and we also want to eat the honey, generally, that honeybees can create for us. So let's first touch on native bees. So there are a huge variety of them that exist in the world, thousands of different species, and not quite that many exist in Ontario, but there are 400 different types of native bees here, and primarily in the categories there. Some of them are social, and they therefore live in colonies. And many of them are, the majority in fact, are solitary, and they live alone. And they generally live in a small nest below ground, or in trees and the debris of trees as they're dying, either still standing or laying on the ground in a forest. So let's have a look here. These are the different varieties of native bee that exist here in Ontario. The one in the upper left corner is the leafcutter bee, and they're very small, so the tip of your baby finger, so you don't often see them unless you're looking, but you will notice in your garden sometimes a leaf has a piece cut out of it, and the leafcutter bee likes to make a little circle. And they take that leaf that they have just cut off part of your plant, and they use it to make their nests, interestingly enough. They dig a little hole, and then they put a leaf in it as a little bed, and they lay an egg, and they leave a little bit of a pollen and nectar behind, and then they put another leaf in, and they kind of go away, and the egg has to do its own thing. That's the thing about a lot of solitary bees, is that they do not really take care of their babies as much as bees that live in colonies. And it's not like they're just abandoning them. It's the way nature is, and the life cycle, the The egg will mature into a larva, and then it will pupate, and then it will become a bee. That's the same metamorphosis process that butterflies go through. And what have we got here? The next one is the carpenter bee. They look very much like a bumblebee, except they're smaller. The one in the lower left, that's a picture of 2 sweat bees that are on this beautiful pincushion flower in Dundonald Park, just a couple blocks away from my house. And the 2 in the bottom right corner, those are miner bees, and they like to dig in the sand, and they use mud to create their nests. And the upper right corner, that's actually a picture from my cottage. Those are the leafcutter bees on a raspberry bush, and there are actually 3 of them in the picture, so that was quite a treat to see. So feel free to ask any questions as we move along, and Velta will monitor the chat box and let me know if I'm moving along too quickly. Okay, so
I have a question, Dinah.
Yes.
So on one of your pictures, it was like the bottom left hand there, it looked like there was a bee that kind of had a green top.
Yes.
Trunk.
Mm-hmm.
What type of bee is that?
So they're both the green metallic sweat bee.
What do sweat bees? Because I've noticed them in my garden this year.
Yes.
So what do they do?
What do they do? Well, they assist with pollination.
Okay.
They do live, they're not really social and living in colonies, but they kind of live in like a condominium sort of cooperative arrangement where other sweat bee queens and worker bees will be sort of in the same hole in the ground, and it helps them to reduce the number of bees that are required to defend the opening to the hive. So the sweat bees are very, like, imagine being so cooperative with your neighbors. And it's not a competition to see who can eat all the nectar, because there are a lot of flowers, and occasionally the sweat bee will lit down on a sweaty person in a garden. And that's how they got their nickname, because as on top of drinking water and nectar, they're attracted to human salty sweat.
So maybe that answers Ryan Sejan's question. He asks, do they like sweat, or do they sweat a lot, and so they like sweat? Okay.
Yeah, how did they get the name? So
okay.
They are attracted to, and they will lit down on your skin, and they'll hang out for a bit, and they're actually getting a little drink.
Okay.
Electrolytes. You know how every once in a while we need a salt fix on a hot day too. Thank you for that question. That was good. You reminded me of some cute facts about sweat bees. And the sweat bee is Toronto's city bee. So we have a gap here in Ottawa. We don't have a city bee. And, oh, here's one of my favorite bees. So the bumblebee is another predominant native bee in Ontario that is responsible for a huge amount of pollination services. They live in small colonies in the wild, but they're also managed in colonies in greenhouses. They are used to support a lot of produce production, especially tomatoes. Tomatoes require buzz pollination because the flower is large and the pollen is difficult to displace. So the bumblebees will actually kind of grab on to the anthers and shake their little booties That's, you can often hear them buzzing loudly because that's part of it too. They're vibrating their wings and they're shaking the flower, and you'll see them come out and they're covered in pollen as a result. Honeybees will also lit down on tomato flowers, but in terms of the efficiency of that pollination, you will end up with smaller fruit set and tomatoes that don't really develop as well. So that's one of the important things of the right type of pollinator, is that it establishes the appropriate fruit set, and the flower itself is managed appropriately. Like certain flowers have a lot of nectar, certain flowers only have a little bit of nectar, and then, you know, some of them don't release their pollen as readily. So the bumblebee gets in there, and she is a real fighter. She's bigger, and she's got a little fur coat on. So she comes out of hibernation sooner than other native bees, and she is out there fighting the 50-kilometer-an-hour winds in March and April, and trying to pollinate the trees that blossom early in the spring. I watched her last year trying to pollinate our cherry tree, and the winds were so high, she was like driving at the branch, and then the branch would move, but she did not give up until she grabbed onto a flower. So they are persistent. They're like little polar bees, and I vote for the bumblebee as well. Ottawa's bee. Are we the coldest capital? I think we set a record last year. If not Ottawa, then we need
years in a row, yeah.
Canada to have a national bee.
So Dinah, we do have another question about the sweat bees.
Oh, okay.
Jacqueline is asking, do the sweat bees sting you if you try to shoo them off?
Actually, the sweat bees do not have a stinger. A lot of native bees do not have the ability to sting, and so they won't really approach you even. The sweat bee has another purpose for litting down on a human. Bumblebees actually have the ability to sting, and they have a smooth stinger. So that means that they can actually sting you more than once. But they are generally very docile. You can walk up to a bumblebee on a flower and pet them, and they'll just kind of think it's the wind. They only get defensive when you're near their nests. So if you know you have a bumblebee nest, then it's best to find a way to manage around it. So that's, you know, not always convenient for everyone. And the thing is, we have to live in harmony with the insects in our world. And if you end up with a bumblebee nest in the side of your house or under your deck, it will only be there for 1 year, because at the end of the season, all of the bees die off and the queen lays, she creates a new queen, and the new queen will overwinter in the ground, and then she will find a new place to make her nest the following year. So maybe that would be an incentive to just let the bumblebees be.
How do you know that it's a bumblebee nest, and how do you what if you wanted to attract a bumblebee queen to nest on your property? Are there things you could do?
So bumblebees like to pick kind of like they'll build their nests under a rotting deck kind of thing. They build, it's like a cluster. and it's got like bumps on it, like they make a little mound for each new egg, and that's packed with nutrients, pollen and nectar, and they build another, sorry, I don't have a picture of it, but it's like, it looks a bit like a brain with all these nodules on it. And so, yeah, last year, they built a nest in it was 2 years ago. They built a nest in the side of our house where the siding was coming off a bit. But then last year we ended up with wasps in that same spot. So it was like by creating an opportunity for a bumblebee to make a home accidentally, it then created an opportunity for a wasp. So it's about bringing bumblebees to your garden is about the flowers that you put there, and that maintaining a good diversity of flowers that bumblebees love is the best way to bring them to your yard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so the honeybee. It is a social bee, and it lives in a caste system. So the bees have very specific roles and responsibilities. Honeybees generally live in managed colonies unless they've gotten loose and decided to take up residence in a hollow tree or something like that. Honeybees provide the majority of the pollination of our food crops, worldwide. The honeybees are used for what's called commercial pollination services. What this is, there are beekeepers that have thousands of hives, and they truck the bees across the country to follow the nectar flow. So the bees are on a flatbed truck traveling to Florida for the orange grove flowers, and then they're traveling up to Maine where they're doing pollination of blueberries. Then they're going somewhere else doing the cranberry, and then they pollinate the almonds out in California. So while they are there, that's a variety. What happens is the bees are eating the same food for pretty much 2 straight weeks, and then they're getting in a hot, sweaty box that's hotter than the boxes they already live in, and they're being fed sugar water while they're in transit. And then they're going, it's essentially like eating takeout food. And then you're going and you're having a healthy diet, but you're only eating blueberry nectar for 2 weeks, which is delicious. But the thing about biodiversity is also having a rich variety of food for the bees. And commercial pollination services, and the majority of beekeeping is in rural settings. And we have a lot of monocrops in rural settings. So even for the bees that stay at the farm where they live, they've got dandelions in the spring, and then they're waiting for the alfalfa to come up. And then you've got the clover, and then they're waiting for the goldenrod. The farmer next door only has soy, and maybe there's corn, which is wind pollinated. So the thing about bee health is it's just like our health, where if we want to thrive and be resilient, we have to have a richness of nutrients available to us. So, yeah, honeybees, they're wonderful. I love them. I'm a beekeeper, so I can blather on about honeybees for quite some time. There's a little image that is slightly covered up by the participant box, but it's just there to highlight the different sizes. So on the far left, you have the worker bee. The majority of the bees in a honeybee hive are worker bees. Female, hardworking, and they only live for about 42 days. I know. And they are just, it's a labor of love. Every day they have something to do. Throughout their lives, they transition from, as soon as they're born, they do some house cleaning. Right away, they have to clean their room. And then the next thing they do is they have to take care of their sisters. And they're called nurse bees at that point. And then they graduate and they get to go down to the front door. They can be a guard bee, where they're observing the other bees that are coming into the hive and making sure they're part of the family. And then they graduate to becoming a forager, which is about the last 3 weeks of their lives, where they're out flying around collecting nectar and pollen and ensuring the future success of the rest of the colony. They are real troopers. And in the height of the summer, there will be about 40,000 worker bees in a hive. Yes, that's a lot, but they're really little. So they fit in a box that's only 20 by 24 by 8. So it's intensification, urban intensification. We could fit a lot of honeybee homes in here. Okay, get off this personal bent. The next bee, the bee in the middle, is the drone. He is a little fatter and he has huge eyes. He's easily recognizable and he doesn't do any of the things that the worker bee does. If he goes out and visits a flower, he's just drinking the nectar. He's not collecting it to bring back to the hive to help make honey. And his primary function is to help with the reproduction cycle of other queens. So his role is to go out and mate.
So one question, Dinah. Steve has mentioned that he's not seeing any screenshots other than the one entitled Honeybees, and that's very true. That's the one that is on the screen right now.
Here,
but
look.
You might, yeah, no, it's right here. No? I mean, I can see it. It's just that you might have your the participant box. It just automatically glows on the right hand side, so it might be covering the picture. So if you want to move that box on your screen, you'll be able to see there's a picture just of 3 bees.
I just did that too.
Yeah, and also thanks so much, Ryan. Ryan has to say bye, but yeah, we've got the recording and we will have that up and we'll send you the email. Awesome. I'm glad I could help, Steve. Okay. Sorry, continue, Dinah.
Okay, so the final thing about the drone, he does not have a stinger. So you don't have to worry. If you see the big googly eyes, there's no stinger. The woman on the right is almost 2 centimeters long. She is the queen. She is the most recognizable. And even though she looks distinctive, she's very hard to find when she's within the hive because all of the worker bees are trying to protect her and they're kind of clustered around her. And the reason she has that little dot on her abdomen, thorax rather, excuse me, is because it helps you to be able to see the queen. She's very critical. So if you're rearranging things in the hive, you want to know exactly where your queen is. All right. Any questions on honeybees? We're good to go. Oh, no, this is just a little shot. This is a time lapse.
Oh, cool.
of beehives in action. So it is really like, it's like an airport. There's a massive runway, and if you've ever seen the front of a hive, it is very busy, and this is taken over the course of only an hour. Not by me, by a friend. And here's just a little information on how hard the worker bee does work during her very short life. Visiting up to 2,000 flowers a day to gather 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her entire lifetime. So the thing about honey is she's gathering nectar, and nectar has like 80% water in it. So once the bees get it back to the hives, they have to evaporate the majority of the water so that it can be less than 20%. So she's collected a lot of nectar. That's why all the trips. But because of the reduction, it's almost like when you boil sap for maple syrup. You've got a massive container that gets boiled down into that tiny can that runs out far too quickly. So definitely, the worker bee helps to feed the world. Very true. Okay, so another type of pollinator is the beautiful butterfly. And this is a picture of the swallowtail in a field of wildflowers. She's absolutely gorgeous. We had one in our backyard last year who was born here, in fact. So they prefer large open flowers because of the fact it's like creates a little landing pad, although, you know, they'll go for any flower that's available if it smells right. Oh, wait, no, if it looks right, excuse me. So the butterfly, actually, unlike the bees, has this poor sense of smell, but a really good vision. And she is not a very efficient pollinator because of the way she sort of stands perched on a flower. She doesn't, like bees, their underside, their belly actually touches the inside of the flower. Whereas butterflies, it's primarily the proboscis, nice long proboscis that's drinking nectar. What else? Oh yes, for butterflies to proliferate in your garden, you also need to have the host plant that they prefer for their caterpillars. So the monarch butterfly, obviously, she loves the milkweed, and is it the black swallowtail? There's another type of swallowtail that lays its caterpillars on curly leaf parsley. So if you want to attract butterflies, you have to not only have a nice mix of colorful flowers, but you need to have the plant that will allow them to lay their eggs. And then they will continue to hang around your garden because their caterpillars are there and they sort of monitor. It's not like the caterpillar needs any assistance from the butterfly, but she is she's interested enough that she pays attention to what's happening.
So Dinah, we have a question.
Yes.
Are flowers that are good for attracting bees necessarily the same ones that attract butterflies?
There is a lot of overlap, but it's not, they're not necessarily the same flowers. There are a huge variety that all bees and butterflies will be attracted to, but bees see with the ultraviolet spectrum, so they're primarily attracted to yellows and blues and purples. But it's the fragrance of the flowers that really draws them in. So yeah, there's a lot of common flowers that, you know, hummingbirds, butterflies, bees will all be attracted to. but then there are certain varieties that are really specific. Is that okay? I could probably send a list. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I've got a hummingbirds, like for instance, they have a specific, it's like a trumpet-shaped flower because they have a very long proboscis. But I can't think of an example of a flower that a butterfly likes that a bee doesn't. That's a challenge. Okay.
Well, if you think of one, we can always put it in our email afterwards. So no pressure right now, Dinah.
Oh, I'm just going to make a note because that is an interesting little factoid. Okay. All righty. Anything else? That's good. Sorry, I can't come up with an example off the top of my head. Hummingbirds. There we go. I was practically reading what was coming next. So as you can see, this is a type of flower that it doesn't have it's tubular, but it's not too long. So this hummingbirds are loving this, but a butterfly might not. It doesn't have as big a surface, but a bee could easily lit down on this flower as well. So it is like the shape and size do affect what type of bee can access the flower. Similar to butterflies, hummingbirds don't have a great sense of smell, so they're more attracted to the colors. And you know, they love red, as most people know, because of the red food coloring food that most people are encouraged to put in those hummingbird feeders.
Oh my goodness, I had no idea why. I was like, why is this always red?
Yeah.
I didn't.
So you can actually get a container that it's a red, it's not clear plastic. So then you don't actually have to put some red. It's just sugar water, really. So yeah, look into that instead.
Thank you.
And they're very efficient pollinators as well, because they're designed to focus on specific plants. They drink a lot of nectar. They're not really, that they collect a bit of pollen on their beak, but it's not really a food source for them. And they love flowers that refresh their nectar frequently. Wasps. Okay, so wasps are pollinators, but their purpose is not pollination. They're just doing it kind of accidentally because they're drinking nectar and eating pollen. It's not their purpose to ensure pollination. They are carnivores, so they eat insects and they predate other pollinators. They will eat, well, not all wasps, but many wasps will eat bees. They will eat a dragonfly. They will eat a butterfly. So it's kind of hard to imagine that it's something that's just like the size, shorter than your baby finger, could take down a dragonfly or a butterfly, but wasps are predators. So that is part of their purpose. They're the ones that are actually flying around us and bothering us when we're trying to have a picnic. Wasps will go after your food. Bees aren't interested in your hamburger or your salad or even the sweet drink that you may have with you, whether it's an adult pop or some other type of soda. Wasps, you know, if you take a glass of white wine outside and you have wasps around, you have to look at your glass before you take a sip because there could be a wasp in it. At the same time, wasps do serve a purpose.
We're at about 6, we're almost 6:45, just so that you know. I'm not saying you have to rush, I'm just letting you know of the time.
Okay, here's an example of a wasp's nest. This is a paper wasp because they weave, they create this paper, they create some comb similar to honeybees. This is at my cottage. The fact that it's still there is helpful because it means that another wasp will not make a nest there. So that's one way you can stop having wasps, is hang up a fake nest. Okay, and so the thing here is, like, bees do get a bit of a bad rap because of all the other yellow stripy things, and some of them being really pesky and stinging you. So this is just a little kind of a shout out to bees and their struggle against misclassification. So the biggest threat to pollinators is actually habitat loss and reduced biodiversity. So that's why we're here talking today. Other impacts, negative impacts, pesticide use and other agricultural practices. And we also have pests, predators, and diseases that can affect pollinators, as well as climate change. So this is just a little image of all different types of pests that will predate pollinators. I'm not going to go through.
Red one.
Pick one? Okay, so top right, that is the new giant hornet. So that is the latest. 2020 has a new predator, and the giant hornet has invaded Canada's west coast. It has been found in BC already. It's like 3 times the size of a honeybee, and it can take down a beehive in 10 or 20 minutes. It was awful. There's a video.
No. What was the red one?
Oh, I'm sorry. The red one. I thought you said pick one. The red one is a Varroa mite. They are pretty much the biggest pest, other than the new one, for honeybees. And it's if it was on a human, it would be like the size of a pancake. And they basically get into the brood where the larvae are developing, and they can just take over and kill off an entire hive. Barn swallows are good. They eat insects, mosquitoes, but they'll go after bees and other pollinators too, wasps. And then, yeah, the usual. Pollinators and human health. So the serious decline in pollinators brings big risks to us as well. About a third of all the food we consume relies on pollination. Without that, we would be limited to foods that are wind pollinated or don't require pollination at all. Our plate would look pretty bland, and that the loss in variety of our own diet would lead to other health impacts like chronic diseases. Bees also pollinators also take care of 75 to 80% of all flowering plants and trees on the planet. So if we lost pollinators, even just the reduced presence of pollinators, we lose the diversity of the green space around us. So it's not just the plate in front of us that would be less colorful, it would be everything outside the door. And here's just an image you've probably seen, the things that would be left on the shelves without bees. How can you protect pollinators? So focus on native plants. They are designed, they've evolved with our native pollinators. So that's how you can attract them and maintain them. The flowers you choose are also important. Putting in the right colors and big clusters, and making sure there's colors through the season. Replacing your grass with something like clover working on green infrastructure, getting rooftop gardens and green roofs that support pollinator health. You can work on community gardens, and they all require a little patch of pollinator flowers to help the vegetables. Even the food choices we make affect pollinators, so going organic can make a big difference because pollinators are hugely impacted by the use of pesticides. And you can also do a little advocacy, tell others, you know, focus on campaigns with Ecology Ottawa, speak to your neighbors, speak to your counselor, whatever you think will work. It's all worth doing. So, gardening for pollinators, native plants, I've already mentioned, flowers through the entire season. So because of climate change, where spring starts sometimes in March, and it did, oh, but then it stopped. So we need some things that flower early because the bumblebees were out. And then we have a late fall sometimes, and it's just, we have a dearth, which means there's no nectar. You can also ensure there's water available in your garden. If you have a bird bath or just a bowl, you could put some stones in it. Bees and butterflies need to lit down on something in order to drink. Otherwise, they'll drown in the water. If you leave part of your garden a little bit messy, leave the leaves, don't clean up everything. It actually provides nesting site for many of the ground nesting native bees and the ones that overwinter in the ground as well. Avoid using pesticides, I've already mentioned that. And accepting the insect population, it works in harmony. I have a big ant infestation in my back, but I also have beautiful peonies. And peonies won't blossom unless an ant farms the honeydew. So it's, you know, it is what it is, and I love the peonies. So then the lady beetles come and they help with dealing with the ants. It's all like, it's an evolution every summer. And here's a little image with a few flowers on it that are beneficial for bees and butterflies. There are probably 20 or 30 different visions of this. This is actually skep. It's like a very old type of beehive that was made out of, it was woven like a basket. But anyway, that's a good list. A lot of herbs that flower. One thing that's missing from this is basil. My bees love purple basil. I used to pinch the flowers off the basil, but now I just let it flower. I buy extra for myself. And
yeah, there's a lot of plants on there that are edible for humans as well. So
yes, that's the thing.
Yeah, like that's great when it comes to things like where did I see it? Cornflowers, right? Like those are awesome edible flowers as well. And so are obviously sunflowers, thyme, and poppies and dill and everything. So it's really neat. Once you look into outdoor edibles and things that are really good for humans, it turns out that a lot of them are really good for our pollinators as well.
Yes, medicinal herbs. Even I just learned you can eat the flower of borage.
Yeah.
And that it tastes a little bit like cucumber. So I haven't tried it yet, but I'm growing borage this year. It refreshes its nectar the fastest of any plant that grows here in Ontario. So bees absolutely love it. Bees and butterflies. Okay, the community benefits of supporting pollinators. To wrap things up. Green spaces, we love them. They will thrive if we do a little bit to help them, and the better and more abundant our green spaces, the more likely we will have an abundance of pollinators. The tree canopy health is really critically related to pollinators. trees generally flower quite early, and we need the right bees to be out in the cold season. Bumbler. We have food security that is critical, especially right now with all everything that happened in COVID. It helped us realize that, you know, we do need a better local food source and supply chain, and the best way to do that is to kind of grow your own food or support local agriculture. Agriculture, you know, just been everything about our food crops is amplified when we have good pollination. The fruit set is better and the yields are better. Getting out in green spaces and being in plants and trees, that helps with mental health and increases our physical activity. There's a huge economic impact from pollinators. And green spaces even, you know, people want to live where there's more green space. Climate action, it's like without helping the bees, we're going to lose ground, and helping the bees just means helping ourselves, really. And we're going to create a more livable city, which I think is one of the goals of the team that's working here today.
Yes.
All right, I won't get into the rules and regulations. Who wants to finish off with governance? Used to work in a governance role, so it's like, oh my God. When you're invited to a training class to talk about governance, it's
It's rough. It's hard. Okay, so I will just finish off. I'm sorry, this is your final slide?
Yes, any questions?
Great. So I will finish off just by basically saying, obviously, like, thank you so much, Dinah, for putting that together and like educating us about pollinators. I honestly, pollinators is one of like my favorite subjects, so it was really great to be able to listen to you. And I would love it if you're able to come back again in the future, and we can maybe dive a little bit deeper on some of these subjects, like maybe like urban beekeeping or something like that, something that might be relevant to people. Like if we've tweaked your fancy on this, like if you're
the governance a bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe
yes.
governance.
I'd love to help.
Great. So I'm just going to say thank you again to everybody who showed up and participated and learned from Dinah. Ecology Ottawa, we're a local not-for-profit. You know, we're keeping all of these events free and accessible to people, but we are also definitely feeling the financial repercussions of COVID. So if you feel like you have the capacity to be able to donate to our organization, that would be amazing. The donations go directly to us being able to put together these types of events and keep them free and accessible for people. So that would be really great if you could. And we know that not everybody can. So if you feel like you have some time that you might be able to volunteer with us and you can help us behind the scenes and take a little bit of the workload off our shoulders, that would also be great. Links to all of this will obviously be on the thank you email or the follow-up email. And so please click those links and to learn more. Dinah right now is sporting her bee wares that her mother made.
My mom.
Yeah, she's got the masks, which is awesome. So unless any people have other questions, and we'll stay on for the next minute or so, we will bid you adieu and a good bonsoir. And just thank you so much for signing on out. Bye. Bye.
Thanks for joining.
Yes.
That was terrific. Thanks a lot, Bella. And
oh my gosh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. All right. Well, good night, everybody. I'm going to end it, and yeah, Dinah, we'll be in touch.
yes, definitely. Okay, take care.